Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining AWS On Air for another AWS What's Next show. AWS What's Next allows you to dive deep on some of our latest launches, and today we will be talking about AWS Batch Support for AWS Fargate. I am Cunha, developer advocate at AWS, and I'm joined here today by my co-host Suman Debnath, principal developer advocate at AWS. Hello, Suman.
Hello,
And our
Anna.
and our very special guest, Steve Kendrex, Senior Product Manager for AWS Batch. Welcome, Steve. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I'm a huge serverless fan, and I bet Suman is as well. And we're very excited to know more about serverless batch computing using AWS Batch and Fargate. So,
Awesome.
Steve, I'm sorry. So to get things going, can you give us some context into what AWS Fargate is?
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with what Fargate does, but just to kind of give a brief overview of what Fargate is, it's what we call a serverless compute engine. The idea behind Fargate, the central idea behind Fargate is that at the end of the day, customers really care about their applications and what their applications are doing. If it's a service, if it's a batch task, really, if you have a scientific workload, you care about doing science. If you are running web server, you care about what that contains and its growth and how users interact with it. Ideally, customers don't want to be worrying about infrastructure management and patching of the machine image. And the idea behind Fargate is that we can give you a really easy way to provision compute in a serverless way, so that you can focus on your application. So Fargate gives you, some of the main benefits of Fargate is VM boundary isolation, right? So the idea that every task can sit in its own piece of compute. There's no need to worry about security, or security for having two tasks on the same machine. It gives you right size provisioning, so every task gets some compute that's meant for the resources that it has, and only those resources. Right. So that's kind of the idea. Is it just removes a lot of the maintenance and worry about provisioning from the user.
Okay. And now that AWS Batch has support for AWS Fargate, can you also give
Yeah.
us a quick intro to Batch?
Yeah, so the idea about AWS Batch is that, and why we decided to kind of hook it into Fargate. What Batch is it's a cloud native scheduler. Some people in the audience might be familiar with traditional on-premise schedulers that they use today and have used in the past, especially for scientific workloads. But if you're not, what a batch scheduler is designed to do is to run resources as quickly as possible for as low cost as possible, while respecting user priority and urgency, right? So those are kind of the ideas that we have together. What batch in a cloud native context means is we have a vast array here in AWS, and not only just a breadth of compute resources, but a depth of compute resources in terms of the number of different EC2 instance types, but also now Fargate, the capacity pools. And the idea is we spin up capacity that is dynamic according to the customer workload needs. So let's say that you have some image transformation jobs, and then you also have some machine learning jobs that do some activity on those image transformation jobs, right? Those jobs have different resource requirements, but you don't really want to worry about spinning up capacity. You don't want to worry about managing queue and lifecycle for those jobs, right? Essentially, you just want a central place to submit those work and have AWS handle it. That's the central premise of AWS Batch. Is we will accept those workloads, we'll put it in a queue, we'll let you specify some basic requirements that the job needs, and we'll worry about resource provisioning for you. We'll set up a queue, we'll set up a dependency graph for you. You can just specify if your jobs need dependencies, retries, timeouts, and we'll handle submission for you. So again, it's a central place to live. The queue, with Batch, the queue is serverless. The scheduler is serverless, and so it only makes sense now. Before we would spin up EC2 instances, of course we still do that, but it only makes sense to have on the other end of that also a serverless compute layer. So again, even that level of infrastructure management, before AWS Batch would have spun up instances in your account. Now we just spin up a Fargate machine we just spin up some Fargate resources for you.
Excellent. So, Steve, we are kind of combining the best of both the worlds, and
Yeah.
ever since we launched a Fargate, our customers are, using it, in almost every application. So
Right.
now, from a current, any customer who are already a user of Fargate, who are actually using Fargate today, why should they use AWS Batch with Fargate? Or what is the value proposition?
Yeah, so the idea behind Fargate is again, as I mentioned earlier, Fargate is awesome for those, for the compute resource itself, right? It gives you that way to just specify and say, hey, here's what my task is trying to do, and then it's assigned to a resource that's provisioned for it. With batch workloads in particular, there's a little bit more that has to get put in. Batch workloads are really typified by a larger number of asynchronous tasks. They all don't need immediate response. There's some kind of a concept of a wait time, right? Even though the job may be urgent, it's not so urgent in terms of like, there's not necessarily a service waiting on the other end urgently, going for a request. It can wait some set of time before it needs to start. And there's definitely there's more work than can be handled by maybe a single API call. So, even if you're calling run task on Fargate, if you have 10,000 tasks, it's going to take some time for all of that work to get filled in. Generally speaking, before when customers needed to run batch workloads in Fargate, they might have had to, especially if they've had more, than a few dozen, they might have had to have built their own queuing construct to submit workloads to Fargate just to handle that submission pattern. And then, of course, if something needs to retry, it might slow down the queue. So customers had to handle that. They had to handle timeouts. They had to manage state for the jobs, especially if you're trying to take some other action, once that job is finished. And so there's all of these things that to run a batch workload still had to get built in front of Fargate in order to run those super effectively. Now, we have several options for that. Some customers would use something like an event bridge or an Apache Airflow or step function, something like that. But with AWS Batch, we give you those queuing constructs. So essentially, we give you a managed queue. We give you all of the capabilities just with simple, API statements. We give you all that in a serverless fashion, right? So all you have to do is call batch, and we will pick up handling, the queuing, the dependencies, the retries, the timeouts, and the priorities all for you. And you don't have to manage a single piece of compute infrastructure to do that.
Okay, so we talked about the benefits of AWS Batch for Fargate users. What about the other way around? If I'm currently running batch computing jobs using AWS Batch, how can I
Yeah.
benefit from using Fargate?
Yeah, sure. So, so today batch runs workloads, or I should say previous to our launch last week, batch runs workloads on EC2 instances. And what would happen is that as jobs came into the queue, we would spin up EC2 instance for you. That was essentially looking at the queue. We would look at the queue, we would decide which EC2 instances to spin up, and we would, maintain the lifecycle of the instances. But even with that level of management, customers were telling us that, it's great that you do this, but I really don't want to worry about, Amazon Machine Embedded Omni patching. I don't really want to worry about which EC2 instances. I'm selecting to go into my compute environment. I don't want to worry about and some customers had some things that were somewhat difficult to do in batch, which was like, again, I talked earlier about isolation on the host. A customer would have to kind of configure batch to force it to spread out jobs so that only one job was guaranteed to land on one instance. It wasn't shared. So there wasn't an easy way to do that in batch. And some customers had some I'll talk about that in a second. But that's really some of the benefits of Fargate is, again, now there's no need to worry about AMI patching. There's no need to worry about, figuring out which EC2 instance is right. Although Batch would give you an opinionated look, it's still just easiest to use Fargate. There's also two other considerations. Speed of compute is something, so there's no need to wait for an EC2 instance to spin up. Right, your jobs can get started much more quickly. And then also there's right sizing. Generally speaking, Batch did a pretty good job about bin packing jobs together on machines, but some users and some workloads, it wasn't best for all things. With Fargate, you get a right-sized machine, assuming that your job fits in the Fargate SKU, and we can talk about that. Batch will essentially submit that job to Fargate, and Fargate will say, okay, great, this job needs 2 vCPUs and 8 gigs. Here you go. Let's throw that on the machine, and it's perfectly right sized. So there's no resource waste. You don't have to worry about spin up, spin down time. So those are some of the main benefits.
Great. So I guess what we are getting as a customer is, if I just think about from customer's shoe, is basically, we are doing all the heavy lifting, and we don't have to, as a customer, they don't have to worry about different AMIs and patches and all of that. Everything is kind of completely on serverless. So now, as an engineer or the developer, everything falls in place when we see something live in, as a demo. So can you just help us, if I'm a new user, how to get started with it?
Yeah, so here, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and spin this up. We'll do a nice, we'll take a risk here and do a nice live demo for you. And the idea here is that one of the things that I want to get across is just how simple and easy it is to start getting started with setting up an entire front to back batch computing workload. So we're just going to do all this in a console. It's not going to take very long. I'll kind of walk through how you can get started doing this. So essentially, let's take a look at what we're going to build today. Right. So the idea here is that, and if we just take a central look at how this works, there's a few things that we're going to set up. And I'll just walk through, again, we're going to go through each of these things. So a batch job is simply a job definition. It's got your container image, it's got your roles and permissions, right? And that is set up as essentially a reference point, that is stored in AWS, right? It's something that AWS Batch keeps track of for you, and that is the reference that you'll use to submit your job. So we're going to create a job definition. We're going to create a job queue. That's where a job goes to live when the job is essentially waiting for compute resources, right? It lives in a job queue, so you don't need to manage it or worry about it. Obviously, I'll talk a little bit about the batch scheduler and how that works. You don't ever really see that. That's something that works in our account that's going to operate on your jobs. And then there's a compute environment, and that's where the Fargate kind of tasks go when they're running. And then, if you want, you can, write up the storage, and I'll talk about that. So I'm going to go ahead and create this. Again, it's only going to take a few minutes just from essentially scratch. Obviously, you wouldn't even account to do this, but, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to go in here and create a compute environment, as I mentioned. So we'll have a managed compute environment, which is with Fargate tasks is the only way to do it. We're going to call this reInvent. A reInvent compute environment, and we're going to go ahead and select down here Fargate or Fargate Spot. I'll talk a little bit about how Fargate Spot works. Essentially, Fargate Spot is interruptible tasks that can save you up to 70% of the Fargate price. What Fargate Spot allows you to do is essentially, in a similar way to EC2 Spot, is trade off availability for cost savings. The beauty, one of the best things that what AWS Batch can do for you is it can handle retries for you automatically. And so if your Fargate job is sitting on a Fargate Spot resource and it gets interrupted, we can then take that job back and resubmit it for you. So it's super easy to handle, and I'll talk about error handling and how we can manage that. But essentially, just to continue on, we're going to go ahead here and select Fargate, right? And so I've got my role here. Essentially, right, there's no other things. You don't really need EC2 key pair because there's no instance role. So we're going to go ahead and say, okay, Fargate, I'm going to set a cap on the number of vCPUs that I want to be running. Essentially, this says, okay, I don't want more than 256 vCPUs worth of tasks running in this compute environment. Gives me control. If I want, I can, set this to 100. I can set this to something else, but we're going to hold it at 256 for now. I've got my VPC. I've got my subnets already pre-selected for me. And then, there's additional settings in here if we want, but there's really no need. I'm not going to create any tags, right? So I've got this compute environment spin up, and you can see it right in here is reInvent. It's getting created. So while that's getting created, it only takes a few seconds. I'm going to go ahead and create a job queue. This job queue is essentially what it's going to do is I'm going to hook this in, and I'll call this the reInvent job queue. and I'll give it a priority. Priorities just allow me to designate, usually between users, and say, okay, give me a high priority and give me a low priority. And what that does is it allows the scheduler to distinguish which jobs to select from first. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a priority of, I don't know, let's call it 10. And then I'm going to go ahead and not create any tags, and I'm going to go ahead and create it and connect it to the compute environment that I just created. So we've got it created. Here you go. You can see it. It's right here. Right? And so that's creating. And then, while that's doing, again, it only takes a few seconds to create. I'm going to go create a job definition. Again, a job definition is simply something that allows me to keep track of, what the jobs are supposed to be doing, and it stores it for me. So again, I can go back and reference that every time I want to go submit a job. I'll call this a reinvent job definition. We'll call it reinvent 2. And I'm going to specify that this is a Fargate so that the batch scheduler knows to check. What batch will do is it'll check to make sure that your jobs are within the allowed Fargate SKUs. So again, there's certain SKUs that Fargate has in terms of vCPU capacity requirements, or vCPU memory. So batch will authenticate that and say, okay, this doesn't fit in the same, this doesn't fit, this isn't allowed SKU, so I'm going to reject that job. So it gives you that feedback. Retry strategies, if I want, I can say, okay, I'm running on Fargate Spot, although I'm not in this demo, but if I am running on Fargate Spot or I'm doing something else, I can set up a simple retry strategy that says, I'm going to have 5 attempts, and on exit of the batch job, I'm going to do something, right? So on exit code 5, or maybe I have a status reason that says host EC2 terminated, something like that, which might indicate, well, that would be in EC2, but essentially the equivalent for spot, right? Interruption, something like that. I'm going to decide, maybe I want to retry, maybe I just want to exit. For on spot interruption, maybe I want to retry. If there's my application has a certain failure that I know is always going to fail, it's never going to retry, it's never going to succeed if it encounters this error, maybe I just want to exit, right? So I can set that up. I'm going to remove this for now just because, this is just a simple demo. I'm just going to use, public Amazon Linux image, and we'll do echo hello reinvent. And I'll specify my vCPUs. And again, we just give you here, we say, listen, you're running a Fargate task. I'm going to help you out with your SKUs. If you want to use fractional vCPUs, you can. I'm just going to use 2, and I'll use 4 gigs of mem. I got my ECS execution role. Again, we help you out to create that. And I'm going to assign public IP since I'm using a public image. Fargate, I just specify my Fargate platform version, right? 1.4. I could use latest if I wanted to. And that's essentially it, right? So I am ready to go. I've got my job definition set up. Again, I talked through a lot of that, but you could see how fast it would be if I just really wanted to go in and just create something. Mostly we have pretty sane defaults in the console for you to select from. Okay, so I've got my job definition, I've got my job queues, I've got my compute environments. I'm going to go ahead and select a job. I'm going to submit a job. So we'll call this reinvent 22. I'm going to go ahead and select a reinvent job def that I just created. I'll select my reinvent queue. Again, you saw in there I had previous compute environments all spun up. I had a bunch of queues, but because of this Fargate, we're going to help you out and just only expose the Fargate queues for you. The queues that are attached to Fargate compute environments. I'm going to say, hey, I can do some overrides here. If I want, I can say I'm going to, set a 1,000 override. I can change my job attempts if I want. I'm going to submit an array job. So, hey, let's throw in 100 jobs and see what happens. If I want, I can change the command. I can change this, but I'm not going to change any of that for right now. But again, these are kind of overrides, but it all just pulled it in for me automatically when I selected this job definition. And so I'm going to go and submit this job. Right, and so essentially you can see, even with me talking through a bunch of the options, I don't know how long that was, but it was like 5 minutes, and I already have a complete architecture set up. All right, so if we want to see what's going on, I've got my reinvent job here, and I'll click into this. This is what's called a job array. So an array job in AWS Batch is simply just a a concept that will allow me to track multiple jobs under one single thing. And you can see here, I've already got some jobs. All of these jobs are in the runnable state. The runnable state just means they're ready. They're in the queue. They're ready for compute when it's available. And we've got 27 jobs just in the time I talked from submission time that are starting, right? So they've been submitted to Fargate. Those Fargate tasks are the Fargate resources are spinning up for them. And there we go. I've already got 25 in running state, again, just in the time I've been talking. So again, Fargate's pretty fast. It shows pretty clearly how easy it is to just go up and get the job starting. If I want, I can go click in here, and I've got the job succeeded. It gives me all of my stuff. If I want to go, look at the logs, I can go click in here and get essentially what's happening. Woo! And it says hello reInvent. That's pretty much. Oh, I might not have been able to see that on screen share, but essentially, right, I just clicked into the logs and it output what it was trying to do. There you go. So that's essentially it. You can track this as you go along. We've got this task coming here, and you can see batches churning through these 100 jobs pretty quickly. I mean, again, we're already pretty much all the way through the 100 jobs that I submitted, and so that's essentially how it works in a very, very brief demo for you.
Yeah, no, that was really impressive. I think it took you 5 minutes to set it up.
Yeah, and that was with me talking
Really
through
cool.
all the options and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely makes things pretty easy.
And it was good. It was a live demo. Those are always risky.
So, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we definitely know about it. So, Fargate, AWS Batch using Fargate seems like really like the way to go. But do you have any suggestions when we should use in-situ instances? Or
Yeah,
when we should go with
there's a
instead?
few axes that you should be thinking about if you're really sitting down and thinking, okay, this sounds great. Lots of customers are happy with Batch on EC2. I'm sure many customers will be happy with Batch on Fargate. How should I make that decision? There's a few key things that you should be thinking about. One is if you require any sort of special access to special Linux parameters that you want to be using. Fargate doesn't yet give you access to those. If there's some certain like ARM architecture that you want to use, if GPUs, of course, those aren't available in Fargate. So those, definitely, if you have any of those special considerations, I would strongly consider, using EC2. Number two, I would say is scale. What sort of scale are you looking at running at? Fargate does have some concurrency limits, and it has some submission time limits. It is quite fast, but again, if you're looking to run 100,000 vCPUs, then I would suggest that you take a look at EC2. Batch has some really good tools to enable you to scale up EC2 instances at that scale. You might run into some concurrency limitations with Fargate when trying to scale at that level, if that makes sense. So those are kind of the two overriding concerns. If you have special configurations that aren't available in Fargate's queue, please use EC2. And very large scale runs, we would recommend EC2 as well. There's also some additional things that you should think about, and those are cost and spin up time, right? So generally speaking with Fargate, obviously everyone knows that there is an additional cost for Fargate. And by the way, I should clarify all this to say that AWS Batch is free itself, right? It does provide you with all the serverless, queue, job definition, compute environment constructs, but you only pay for the resources that we launch for you. It itself is free. There's no cost to a compute environment, for example. But everyone knows that Fargate has its own, has an additional cost on top of EC2. However, what a lot of customers find is that those costs get offset in terms of right sizing and no need to wait for the spin up spin down time of EC2 resources. So those can definitely depend on your use case, whether or not you find that which one is cheaper. I would definitely consider if you think or using Fargate Spot, for example, would be a great way with AWS Batch managing the retries and the provisioning. Definitely a great way to lower costs. So I would take a look at that, but it is always considering according to your workload requirements, right? So, but a lot of people find that they can get just as good, or in some cases less cost for Fargate. The other consideration is spin up time, right? So Fargate, as you can see just how fast, when I was doing that demo, just how fast Fargate was spinning up those, those containers, and they were running. And the reason for that is there is no need to wait for EC2 resources. Essentially, we find that works for the majority of customers, right? The majority of customers should be looking to the batch Fargate for that kind of very quick spin up and get it running time. There are some set of customers that might still find that EC2 works for them, and the reason for that is that if your jobs are, you have a very large number of jobs that are running over time, once those EC2 instances get spun up, it's only going to take a few seconds to get your tasks running on EC2 instances. Once they're spun up, once they've already got them running up, so it's kind of, you're paying a very high initial spin up cost, but then over time you're going to start seeing the tasks starting to run faster as we provision more and more EC2 instances. You're going to start seeing the average container runtime drop because you don't have to pay that cost anymore. With Fargate, it's a little bit longer of a spin up time, but it's much faster for the initial spin up time. So that was kind of a lengthy explanation, but those are just some things to consider. I would recommend that most customers just starting out, again, please, I would recommend Fargate, as a default consideration. If you have some considerations after trying it out, then maybe take a look at EC2. But for most customers, I would recommend starting out with Fargate.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. I think it definitely depends on each use case, right? You gave us a lot of very good points in which EC2 instances still make way more sense.
Yep.
All right. Oh, thank you so much, Steve, for taking the time to talk to us today. I know there's already a blog post up on Fargate support for AWS Batch. Is there anything else you want to call out to?
No, just, I'd encourage you, you saw it was pretty easy to go out, take a look at the blog post, it walks you through, again, how to set it up in the console. Go ahead and try it out for yourself. It's pretty easy and low cost to just go ahead and get started.
Yeah, for sure. It took you 5 minutes. I was really impressed.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We have another show right after us, so keep posted.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.